technical side? Do I start with the snarky elitist side?
Start with the snarky elitist side, I think.
Fair enough.
Completely new terminology now. What do you mean inches? My head hurts again. I thought I cleared all this up, man.
Thank you for the intro. Done. Thank you.
I'm glad to get rid of that.
What's right becomes left.
See, that would have that's kind of a shock to me that I associate with like the full frame look. How I got tricked into it being the full frame look. Let's see if I can get this intro in one go. So in my adventures, guessing focal lengths and then like looking up information, I've noticed that there's this almost like a cult of the full frame. It appears to be the most popular synthesized on any given photo sharing website with like a 99:1 ratio of full frame to other sensors. Cinematography tutorial sites and like videos always talk about full frame, the full frame look and why it's so great. Why is it that we hear so much about full frame in the professional cinema context and like so little about other synthesizers? Because I'm aware that there are movies that were shot on other synthesizers, but it's normally in cases of having a low budget or a very, very, very hyper-specific style. Am I making any sense right now?
Yes,
is this anything, as Jerry Seinfeld says?
I'm just not sure where to start, to be honest. Do I start with the technical side? Do I start with the snarky elitist side?
That'll do wonders for our audience. Yeah, start with the snarky elitist side, I think.
Fair enough. Mine's bigger than yours.
I was joking. Do what you want. Do what you want.
I do think there is.
I did hear that, by the way. I didn't miss that gag.
I do think there is a fair amount of snobbery. I do think there is a fair amount of elitism. This was the big kind of selling point for moving to 35mm film when I was a student. Like you started, first thing you could handle was like a 3-chip Handycam video camera. So you would be familiar with that look and style from your JVC prosumer cameras that you were first introduced to at JMC.
Yeah.
And then you kind of build up, you get your hands on like a so that was a 1/3 inch sensor. Then you kind of manage to build yourself up to maybe a 1/2 inch sensor, a 2/3 inch sensor. Then you go on to like 16mm.
I'm hearing completely new terminology now. What do you mean inches? My head hurts again.
Okay, let's do this.
I thought I cleared all this up, man.
Thank you for the intro. Done. Thank you.
I'm glad.
The inch terminology in sensor size is a completely different rabbit hole.
I don't know why I allowed myself to be lulled into the false sense of security that once I knew these things I would know, because that never happens.
We have alluded to the inch nomenclature of sensor sizes. Technically, micro 4/3 refers to a 1/4 of an inch sensor size.
Get rid of that. Say 1/4 inch sensor size?
Technically, the micro 4/3 builds on the tradition of the inch system of naming sensors.
I've noticed full frame being used as like a marketing thing, like in the same way people use the term megapixels or certain aspects of resolution, that kind of thing. Yeah, this camera is full frame. It has 4 billion megapixels per clunkus, and therefore you can just pick it up and produce a perfect image all the time without any effort. Am I kind of right in saying that?
I feel there is a fair bit of it in that. You're going to step up the ladder, and a lot of what it was associated with was as we step up from 1/3 inch to 1/2 inch to 2/3 inch to 16 and then eventually 35mm. As your sensor size gets larger, it becomes easier to get shallower depth of field.
Right. Okay, because let me see if I can guess this, articulate this. Because your field of view isn't as limited by your range of like focal lengths. Like you're able to get a shallow depth of field with a 70mm lens, because if you use a 70mm lens on a tiny sensor, you're locked into this tiny frame, whereas you're fine if you have full frame. Is that too vague?
No.
I'll just leave it.
And also there are other factors. But for now, let's go with generally shallow depth of field is easier with a larger sensor size. However, there are limits. And once you get up to certain sensor sizes, then there are other means of getting to that shallow depth of field. A lot of that shallow depth of field actually also depends on the viewing size and distance. Which, does that ring a bell?
Yes. Viewing size and distance has been a recurring theme here. You'll be delighted to hear that it is being massively hammered into my brain.
I don't have the figures right in front of me, but if I remember correctly, the lens on a typical phone used to be like 3 to 4 millimeters. How I think about it, I may be wrong about it, but this kind of makes sense because the lens nodal point, N-O-D-A-L, nodal point, which is the point where the light rays cross over and invert. So you know how the image forms upside down and inside out, so flipped and flopped.
Yeah, when we looked through anamorphic lenses together, you had us look through them, like actually just go, and the image came out upside down because,
and also
inside
inverted.
out. Yeah.
If you make a circle, close one eye, and you look through it, and you imagine, if you want to see what's over there outside, which way would you need to move your head? You wanted to see what was to the left of you on the other side of your fingers.
Oh, I'd go this way.
Yeah. Can you see now how what's right becomes left? Because you're looking through a smaller opening.
If I want to look to my right, I have to move left, is what that's what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And vice versa. And same with up and down. If you want to see what's above, then you need to go down to look up.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, I'm just thinking Pan's Labyrinth here.
Yeah.
That means that all the light rays will cross at a certain point, and that's at nodal point. And that's the point where we measure the focal length.
Oh, I did not know that. Okay, right. It isn't just like the length of the lens, it is the length of the lens. What?
No, but because think about it, your 14 millimeter lens.
That is not 1.4 centimeters long.
No.
Yes, okay, so it's a lot going on before the nodal point of a lens, isn't there?
Or where the nodal point optically appears isn't necessarily where it physically appears. But another rabbit hole. And to be 100% honest, I'm not qualified to really go deeper than that.
That sounds like optics. Like that sounds like full-on science. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Which is probably the...
So, not qualified. The nodal point is the point where we measure the focal length from, right? If you imagine 4 millimeters. Now, let's say in that distance between that nodal point and your sensor, you're going to try and differentiate every single distance difference in the scene in front of the lens.
Let me just absorb what you just said. I think I know what you're getting at. Please continue.
Everything then is going to bunch right up on each other, aren't they?
Yeah.
You just don't have a lot of room to lay it out in between that focal point and the sensor. Now, I'm 100% sure this is not the scientific explanation, but it helps me understand the difference.
Okay, that's all we need.
Now, if we increase that distance, let's say we go to a 400 millimeter lens, in my mind then, I've got a lot more separation because I can spread out those distances over a much bigger area.
Yeah, so you're thinking it's almost like what you're laying out in front of the camera
needs to fit like an accordion style behind the camera.
You're picturing an equivalent miniature world happening in between the sensor and the nodal point.
Yes. So at 4 millimeters, everyone's kind of like just jam-packed right next to each other. But at 400 millimeters, there's much more space to differentiate.
Yeah.
The theory goes we are getting less depth of field with bigger sensor sizes because we're using longer focal lengths for the same field of view.
You mean more depth of field? No, less depth of field. What am I talking about? Sorry, less depth of field. Yeah.
Here's where it all falls apart. With a tiny, extremely tiny sensor, then yes, if we go up double, triple the sensor size, yes, we're definitely going to see differences. But at a certain point, sensor sizes become big enough that the differences are within something that we can compensate with a larger aperture. If you like that full frame look, I suspect part of that is the depth of field. So you can match the depth of field of a full frame sensor lens on a APS-C or Super 35 sensor by opening up one stop relative to the stop used on the full frame sensor. So let's say for example that you really like the look of this shot on a full frame sensor that was shot on an 85 millimeter 2.8 aperture.
And if I go to a Super 35 sensor,
yes,
I'd shoot it at a 2.
On a 50 millimeter
Not
lens.
2, we're talking about.
Yes, at a 2.
Okay.
Remember how I was saying in the standard set, go down one lens?
Down one.
For one sensor size.
Up one stop.
Up one aperture.
Yeah, okay. And that's just to match the depth of field.
Correct.
And the field of view, right?
Correct.
Roughly?
Correct.
In that case, big question, what's the point of these differentiations in sensor size? Is it just for more versatility?
There is that, but I do think that a lot of it is an element of what you alluded to earlier. The new megapixel wars is sensor size wars. But I do think at a certain point, when you get big enough sensors, then optically lens design becomes a lot more complicated. And I think part of traditionally from the stills world, medium and large format, I do feel they have a distinct look.
I think I've heard people talk about this. It grabs the entire image circle of a lens.
Yes.
Like larger formats.
Yes.
It picks up more of the distortion around the edges.
Yes. I think that's got a lot more to do with it, I think. Ethan figured all of this out on his own. No coaching, no hints, no studying up or like any kind of advice beforehand. It's all Ethan.
I've probably watched something at least a year ago that said the exact same thing and then just thought that I came up with the idea.
Ethan's foot?
Ethan's foot.
You don't say that. You take it. Yeah, I did. Like, yeah, well, it just suddenly popped into my head.
I think that explains a lot. A lot of huge budget blockbusters that I've watched have an extremely and I actually quite like it. Like, it's not a great. Have like an aggressively anamorphic look to them. And I know that there's so much stuff that I watch that has anamorphic lenses that I don't even notice because I'm too silly. But I think I notice it more with bigger budget films because they're using anamorphic plus large format. So it's literally just the entire effect of the lens on the screen, the whole thing. I don't know if that's complete garbage that I'm saying right now, like a huge generalization, but it makes sense to me.
I'm not 100% sure. I think full frame anamorphics are a very, very recent invention.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Because
I didn't know that.
Anamorphic was originally designed for 4x3 4 perf analog film, and
on account of the stretch. Like that was the point of it, right?
No. As in the image circle was designed for analog film because that was the main shooting format when anamorphic lenses became popular. I'm going to have to look it up first. Full frame anamorphic might have been a Cook, and that we're maybe looking at 2015, 2016.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Maybe.
All the blockbusters that I can think of right now are post 2015, but like, I know what you mean. Like, it doesn't sound likely.
In any case, I suspect that a lot of the full frame look is that people subconsciously like the fall off in optical performance at the edges.
Yeah, which I understand. It sounds bad when you say, oh, yeah, it's fall off in optical performance, but it adds a lot of texture, which I realize is a very film bro-y thing to say. But I think it does. It is an aesthetically pleasing thing.
Certainly these days, I don't see any other reason for using anamorphic. Like, I don't see any point whatsoever in shooting anamorphic at such a deep stop that you don't see the artifacts, the oval bokeh, the flares.
True,
like, take away all that, then if you're only doing it for the widescreen crop, then I think personally you're wasting money.
I'm so happy to have you around to say that kind of thing because I know that I would be the kind of person who falls for the top 10 best lenses, epic video, buy this anamorphic lens and all of your things will look perfect. Like, I know that without you, I will have just thought anamorphic meant better, you know? Which I think is kind of similar to our full frame conversation where like is kind of rippling through a lot of videos about this kind of thing, like anamorphic just being better.
For me, there seems to be certain emotional attachments with anamorphic. To me, it's a little bit like the analog thing in music. You know, people arguing that tube amps are better and like whatever pedals and effect analog versions are better than software ones, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, it becomes almost impossible to prove one way or another, and it becomes a matter of taste.
Yeah.
What a lot of people, if they just listen to the hype, don't realize is that there are a lot, and I do mean a lot, of technical hurdles to even make anamorphic workable, full stop.
And financial hurdles.
Yeah.
Like, there's just a lot of handles, full stop. It just sounds logistically inconvenient.
Yeah. So probably the biggest one is the very far minimum focus distance.
Oh, the minims are pretty wacky on them, aren't they?
You know, getting it to actually be optically aligned so that your oval bocals aren't skewed in cheaper optics, that's a problem. You have something called the anamorphic mumps.
Anamorphic mumps.
As in, you know, fallen cheeks, puffy cheeks, whatever that old disease was called.
Is it swell?
No, but...
Yeah, the mumps.
Yeah, depending on the type of focus mechanism used, some anamorphic lenses has variable squeeze factor depending on focus distance. So
so the distortion like changes as you
yes.
focus.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
And so if you apply just a single de-squeeze factor, then you will see different kind of widths of faces depending on the focus distance.
God.
But what I was going to say was, if you do want to delve into more of those kind of implications and kind of like why some people love it and the warts and all the problems that comes with it, there's a YouTube channel called Anamorphic on a Budget.
Oh, that's a nice name.
Tito Ferdans, I think he's Portuguese. Not 100% sure, but he deals with a lot of the kind of budget anamorphics. So
I know this guy. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I've seen him.
by budget, I mean like not $40,000 US per lens.
Yeah.
But he's got a very much a love affair with the look.
Yeah, which is fair. Like I like that kind of thing, you know?
For me, I've tested anamorphics, but I never actually ended up shooting a project on any of them because it's just monetary wise, it never made sense. I would have had to give up other things. As in, you can have anamorphics, but then you have no crew, you have no grade, you have, no lunch.
Say it's like I think you said it before. You've never wanted anamorphics, but no lunch.
Yeah, just the impracticalities. Like once directors go, if you want a close up, we're gonna have to go to a diopter, so a close focus attachment, which means you won't be able to focus any farther away than maybe 1.5 meters. So you can either have close ups or you can have far distance focus, but you can't transition between the two. And guess what? A lot of directors say to that.
No. I have a question.
Yes.
To get us back on sensor size, we've talked about the full frame look. That's on the note of there kind of being this incredible bias towards full frame. All I see, people always talk about the full frame look. Do you know if you have facilities right now to describe or even define a Super 35 look or a Micro Four Thirds look?
I can definitely do the Super 35.
All right.
Let's
have a crack.
No problem whatsoever.
What's the Super 35 look?
Blade Runner, Apocalypse Now.
Right. Oh, all right.
Well, that's Blade Runner is technically anamorphic, so it's like for perf. But anyway.
Are you just going to list all of the
Days
popular
of
movies
Heaven,
from
Conformist, 7.
Oh, 7.
Basically anything was shot on film.
See, that's the thing.
1930 or 40 up until
because of
now.
When you say 7, that's the thing. Now my whole world has been turned upside down because I've always had this impression that Fincher's look, especially for movies like 7 and
Fight Club, Panic Room, The Game,
Alien 3,
all of those were 35mm film.
See, that would have that's kind of a shock to me because all the things that I associate with the full frame look, on account of being wrong, mind you, all the things that I incorrectly associate with the full frame look. If I'm not mistaken, I think Fincher has the way that he shoots. I really like. It's a kind of like a general preference for a wider range of lenses and like a very common use of low angles, especially earlier on in his career, like frequent dolly movements and that kind of thing. That's the kind of thing that I associate with like the full frame look, probably because of all the actual depth that his sets have and like the actual relative distance of objects. We discussed this before, like how my preferences were apparently in wider lenses, and then you were like, oh,
being physically closer so that you get more full frame.
Yeah, like exactly that. Which I think is probably how I got tricked into it being the full frame look, because it is physically closer. He is generating more depth by normally being on the diagonal of a room and like moving straight through it with a wider set of lenses. Like if you had told me David Fincher was full frame, or like earlier movies like that were using full frame, I would have been like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's reasonable. That makes sense.
Part of my debunking of this whole thing with the full frame, or what I should say, the cult of full frame, does Blade Runner feel limited? And I mean the OG Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Does Blade Runner feel limited visually by its sensor size?
Absolutely not is the hard objective answer to that one. If anyone in the comments says anything otherwise, they should be blocked and reported.
Let me give you a couple of other examples. You know, the wrestler, Darren Aronofsky.
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it.
Just go and Google some screen caps.
I will. This is bringing me on to another line of questioning. because first off, I'll focus on the wrestler.
And whilst you're doing that, you also try and look up some frames of girl fight.
I'm aware of girl fight.
Mhm.
Okay, all right. I'm looking at the wrestler.
In terms of depth of field and
Alright.
scope and the feel of size and space, do you feel that it's kind of limited?
No,
Does it feel non-cinematic?
no.
That's Super 16, which is half the diagonal of Super 35.
Wow, I almost don't believe you. Like that is like I'm just looking at this one frame from it, and I like
Go girl fight, Super 16.
girl
Moonrise
fight. So I'm
Kingdom,
looking. I'm looking.
Moonrise Kingdom.
Moonrise Kingdom.
Super 16. Do any of them feel limited by sensor size that is ever so slightly smaller than Micro Four Thirds?
I feel like I can see Super 16 a bit more in girl fight, but that might also be just a bias in that it looks slightly lower budget.
The wrestler was low budget, really low budget.
Very good point. Again, yeah, I like there are some shots in Moonrise Kingdom where I full on if someone who wasn't you had said this is Super 16, I would have been no. I would have been like, no, you're lying.
Or this is a sensor size smaller than Micro Four Thirds.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's kind of my argument here. Now, most of these they've probably opened up quite a bit compared to how they would have shot on Super 35 or full frame if the cinematographers had a choice.
Yeah.
You know, we were saying about the optical performance falling off towards the edges of the imaging circle.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that is what we call lens character.
Nice term. I like that.
What gives a lens personality is kind of the flaws.
That is something I really like. Philosophically, I think that a lot of creative stuff is mostly given personality by its flaws. I'm not going to get into it now.
Anamorphic is the ultimate lens character. But
yeah.
All the stuff that people love about Anamorphic is the flaws.
Literally, like no less than 10 minutes ago, you described one of the most popular features of Anamorphic being optical fall off in quality. Like, it is technically a flaw, but it looks pretty good. Like, it looks great. It generates a distinctive, like, feeling, which is quite nice.
So, as an example, are you ready to circle back to one of your failures?
Always.
Roundness is a lens character.
Okay, all right. Roundness, the big one.
And this is one that the community, as far as I'm aware, we've still not found like an actual scientific optical explanation of what does and doesn't create roundness in a lens.
Wow.
But myself and other cinematographers I've seen, we suspect that it has to do with the fall off in performance towards the edges and artifacting. So things that aren't optically flawless.
Right.
To give an example, actually, did you ever get back to revisiting those roundness tests I showed from Jamesy?
I'm fairly certain when I did this, I gave them a look maybe once or twice and still couldn't tell the difference and felt like confused.
Deflated?
Yeah, deflated. Yeah, so, less round, if you will.
Damn it, we have done too many of these.
Yeah. Just got one from you. Fantastic.
I'm going to give the game away. So the Canons, to my eye, render a lot rounder than the Sigmas. However, WFO, the Sigmas kind of, in my mind, open up. So from 2 onwards, to me, if I was to apply musical terms, it's kind of like peaking and singing like this, like they're very close in character. You go to 1.5 and it's kind of like, someone's trying to hold in their breath to kind of look a bit more streamlined, and then you relax and you just let everything go.
So it's almost like,
and so all these flaws kind of appear, like in the Canons,
optically, or the Sigmas.
In the Sigmas, optically, they really fall apart. But to me, I like that character. They get rounder, they get funkier around the edges.
Well, I'm glad I used the Sigmas then.
Did you use the WFO?
Well, on account of forgetting what that acronym means, probably not.
I've got an exercise example from Jamesy. I can't find the footage right this minute, but there's an example where we shot them WFO
Oh, sorry. Why open? Yep. All right. I'm on it. I'm there.
And people have been asking, was that full frame shooting on the 7K Super 35 crop on the reds?
So again,
just to open up and get that kind of little bit of character around the edges, and you get a bit more roundness and dimensionality. And
that's the thing. I think that shooting, here's where it comes back into, like, it loops back into this. For example, one of the best things I ever heard about the full frame look was a YouTube comment on a video about the full frame look that said, a couple of the things you've said here have been skewed by the fact that the people who use full frame cameras, professional cinema full frame cameras, are normally professionally trained, working on sound stages with wonderful production designers and like excellent set design and are completely in control of lighting and know exactly what they're doing. And I think that's why a lot of people have that kind of that bias towards the full frame looking like better. As you mentioned, the full frame look, so much of it is rooted in the like the low depth of field, which is something you can only achieve wide open. And a wide open is something that's only sustainable if you're very in control of what you're doing and know exactly how you're going to handle the shot after the next shot and the next shot. A lot brighter. You have less options with blocking. Like you probably need to be your training needs to be better. Like you need to be a more experienced, a more knowledgeable person to shoot wide open all the time. Hence, it might just look better. Am I making sense?
Yes, you are. I just wanted to drop one more in there in terms of the personality, subconscious personality that comes into the choice of full frame.
Mm-hmm.
I think very often that really deeply talented people are usually drawn to the highest quality equipment. And these days, that just happens to be full frame.
Yeah.
Because that's the marketing drive. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, that kind of adds to what... Yeah, okay.
There are other choices, as you are saying, that because the most talented people are drawn to this technology, they also bring with them that talent and apply it.
And that, like, incredible control.
That isn't necessarily visible, or it's not as visible to the untrained eye as the spec sheet of camera XYZ.
Yeah.
So along the lines of, if Picasso used XYZ brand of paintbrush, then I'm going to become a better painter if I also use same paintbrush, or, you know, whatever guitar god uses whatever expensive brand guitar.
Or something.
Yeah. I think that's actually a big part of it.
Yeah.
The other part that goes with this as well, I think, is a lot of why this hasn't been so much a case in the past is what actually is depth of field. A lot of people misunderstand that and don't understand the challenges fully.
I mean, I couldn't give you a sentence that completely, like, wholly describes what depth of field is. I know that I can't articulate it soundly into a bunch of words.
To try short and sweet, we can think of the depth of field as at any given focus distance, i.e. the focus distance you set on the barrel, what is the nearest and the farthest point that are still in acceptably sharp focus. And what everyone kind of forgets about is the definition of acceptably sharp.
Go on.
And the acceptably sharp definition is not given. It's not one single definition.
Thought so. Yeah.
It depends on... You want to have a stab at it?
Okay, I've got a few things floating in my mind. It depends on the person. It depends on the lens. It depends on the resolution, the sensor size. I'm just throwing words at you at this point. The first two or three were pretty, like, actual guesses. The rest of it depends on...
I bet you're going to do a forehead slap.
It depends on the alignment of the planets in the solar system. It depends
on the viewing size and distance.
Here we are again. Okay, the viewings. Yes, of course. Jesus Christ. No, of course. Yeah, right. Okay. If I'm watching a movie on my phone directly in front of my face, I'm not going to pick up I'm not going to pick up softness as much as I do on a screen that is encompassing my entire field of view. Right.
So technically, the acceptably sharp focus is defined by the size of a circle of confusion.
I love that the circle of confusion is, like, looming over us like a recurring villain in, like, a cinematic universe of some design. Like, every now and then, it appears behind us and goes like, and then, like, hasn't shown up, and then, like, when we have the circle of confusion
because the amount of effort it takes to teach it, I think of it as the circus of confusion.
So when we eventually get to the epic finale, where we do.
Let me drop a one-liner definition.
Please do. Yeah.
The circle of confusion is the point at which a circle, i.e., if you print an O or a 0, we have got dog approval again.
And toddlers.
I can't hear the toddlers.
Okay, restart. My brain has been reset by the dogs. Sorry.
So imagine printed, like an eye test.
Yeah.
Imagine an O or a 0 on one of the lowest lines. At a certain point, that circle becomes so small that you can't distinguish it from a dot. When that circle becomes a dot, we no longer have acceptable focus.
Is that the circle of confusion?
Yes, there is confusion about whether do we see a circle or not. At that point, when we're no longer certain, is it a circle, then it's out of focus.
I gotta say, I'm a little bit underwhelmed. I was expecting like a huge, like I was like have my brain melt out of my ears. I thought it was like it's called the circle of confusion, and you said it's like a circus to teach it. So what's the?
I suspect it's because, like me, you've seen O's become just blurry discs. 20 of times. I suspect.
So people who've had eye tests before know
and plenty
what
of
the circle of confusion is.
Yeah,
no, it's an easy concept.
The whole globe is just a circle of confusion for me.
I've got a book in front of me. I take my glasses off, and I cannot tell if the O in Corin is a circle.
You're confused, aren't you?
I'm confused.
You're confused about the circle.
Literally, I'm confused. I am. I'm confused. Why isn't this show called the Circle of Confusion? Why didn't we call it the Circle of Confusion?
I don't know. Now, where the confusion really does start, though, is that for depth of field calculations, you have to choose the actual physical size of that circle.
Oh God! Okay, that
and
escalated.
Then you get very different depth of field calculations depending on the size of circle you choose.
That escalated.
That, I think, is a different episode.
I was about to say that escalated like I'm a bit underwhelmed. This sounds kind of simple. This is quaint from like that to like, oh, this is going to be horrible. Like, this is a vile concept that's repugnant to me. We shall see. We've had a bit of a sensor size series lately, I think. Two-parter on sensor size.
There is a lot of mythology around it. I do think there is a bit of... Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Do you feel that the cult of the sensor size, as a beginner, do you feel that it is a little bit daunting to challenge and ask about it for fear of appearing like a noob? Does that make sense? Do you think there is an element of that?
Oh yeah, because I feel like there's just a
like
lot of
all these grades, all these content creators like are bigging it up. So
yeah, like
I don't get
frame,
the hype
at the level that I'm working at right now. I'm not going to have access to a full frame camera, or at least not right now. Like if I want to test something out, so it's like this sense of just always kind of being on the back foot because full frame has become kind of a term for just like better, And in a lot of ways, I think to me, it sounds like full frame just means versatile. Like that's kind of the impression that I'm getting from it.
I personally believe it's misattribution. Gee, that was difficult.
Yeah, it's rough. It's a rough word.
As in misattributing the lens character to the sensor size.
Yeah.
I believe that is a big part of it.
I know that I'd be enthused by shooting on a full frame sensor because I know not only is there so much discourse about it, and not only has, thanks to seeing glass being mostly full frame lenses, that my understanding of focal length and the character of specific focal lengths and lenses and specific apertures has been shaped pretty much entirely by the aesthetic of a full frame sensor size. I know that I would be very excited to shoot in that kind of thing. There's not enough out there, I think, about what you can get out of a Super 35 or a Micro Four Thirds sensor, which is why I asked you.
I kind of think there is. Blade Runner, 7, Fight Club.
All these movies that I thought were shot on full frame. That's Before we wrap up, I did ask you for a definition of the Super 35 look, and you gave me a bunch of examples.
Hollywood.
Do you have but like, what do you mean?
Like Hollywood. The Hollywood.
But our Hollywood? Like now Hollywood or then Hollywood?
Both.
Like mid 90s to late 80s Hollywood?
No. 1950s, 1960s,
All right. Okay. Do you have any characteristics you can attribute to that? Or are they all misattributed from... that's a whole backwards... Don't worry about it. No. Because what I'm asking you to do right there is to make the situation even worse by saying, yeah, I think it has some distortion around the lens, and then like misattributing a bunch of things to Super 35 when in fact it's just a a tool. It's a tool.
So there's a couple of things I do want to throw in there.
Yeah.
I think I came across a saying today that actually fits the situation. All the gear, no idea.
That's the kind of thing I worry about whenever I think about buying gear.
The other one that someone told me early on in my learning was, it's not the wand, it's the magician. It's not the tool, it's not the gear, it's not the equipment, it's the user.
Yeah. I'm always struck in it, like, if we want to talk about like an overall philosophy to like why I even ask these questions, but I'm always stuck in a internal battle between like, should I try and improve myself with the things that I already have, or will I have access to more avenues to improve myself with access to better stuff? I could go on about it forever. And the kind of discourse you hear on YouTube and like other social media about very specific features of very specific cameras, like full frame and megapixels and all these things, make it very hard to kind of discern what is important to have and what you can actually learn from it, if you know what I mean.
Less than 3 minutes now.
That was a very varied conversation. It was great. So it sounds to me we've started off with a few things that have been misattributed to full frame as a part of the full frame look, like depth of field and the greater versatility that you have with depth of field with full frame kind of means that people mistake it for just having innately a better depth of field or a lower depth of field. A lot of it's to do with the optical distortion, like optical fall off and everything. Like in quality, again, is actually an element of the lens that is simply exposed by full frame a bit more. Then we started talking about anamorphic lenses. It was a whole digression. It was great. A Super 35 look being Hollywood, like classic Hollywood, Blade Runner, bit of Fincher. I'm going to look into that. I also recommend anyone listening to look into that. Have a look at Fincher or Blade Runner. The Wrestler, you said. No, that's 16mm. That's Super 16.
Yeah.
Listen, commenters / viewers, if we can get really good examples, if you can find any, of film and TV that was produced on a sensor size smaller, modern film and TV that was produced on a sensor size smaller than full frame, I'd love to look into that. It's excellent.
Where do you want to start?
As in year 2000.
It's like whenever.
Go. Give us some movies that you know weren't shot on full frame. Do it now. Tell us in the comments. Tell us how you think it looks, what you think the Super 35 appearance is.
I'm just going to start. J.J. Abrams, Star Trek.
I didn't know that.
That was film, super anamorphic film.
My life is being changed. I didn't know that. I didn't know. What can I say?
Pretty much anything J.J. Abrams since Alias.
Even Star Wars?
Yeah, that was also film. As in, they made a Darth Vader black Panavision camera especially for The Force Awakens.
I did not know it was film.